I am thrilled that you're able to join us by phone, and I want to say a particular word of great appreciation on behalf of the entire Committee on the Present Danger of China for your new book, Trump versus China, Facing America's Greatest Threat. We noted that you have, among others, acknowledged the important contribution being made by our friend Roger Robinson and others, some of whom are with us here today, some of whom are not, but we welcome you to talk about the broader problem that you address in this book of China, but specifically to speak about the threat posed to us of our underwriting of the threat that they are increasingly manifesting, with respect to the thrift savings plan as well as the capital markets more generally. Welcome, sir.
Well, first of all, let me just thank everybody who's involved, and I appreciate your flexibility in letting me call in. And I can't talk equality on the other side, so
it's perfect.
I hope you can understand me.
Yes, sir.
I think the key thing I want to emphasize is that we are totally unprepared for the scale of competition that the Chinese Communist dictatorship poses, and that our bureaucracies are currently incapable of developing strategic responses, and that the system is not even capable of understanding what a society-wide competition looks like and the ways in which General Secretary Xi Jinping is leading an effort that is dramatically more sophisticated than anything we've ever had to deal with. And I would hope, as a starting point, despite the current partisan bitterness, that we would work very hard to get the House and Senate to hold a series of groundbreaking public hearings on the total Chinese competitive threat, and that we would have the courage to recognize, as the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday in a long article, that the government is in such disarray that we can't deal with 5G and Huawei. We haven't even begun to think about the development of apps like TikTok and what their meanings are as they offer Chinese-designed censorship and Chinese-designed propaganda to hundreds of millions of teenagers who pay for the right to be propagandized. And we have no language to discuss this kind of a threat, this kind of a pattern. So I believe what you're doing is very, very important. I just sent Frank a paper outlining how bad I think the situation is with 5G and the future of the internet. And having now spent 11 months on this, starting with the meeting of all the American ambassadors at the State Department last January, I can report that we are further behind today, that our bureaucracies are utterly incapable of dealing with the scale of the threat, and that only a major initiative by the President himself and a major effort by the Congress on a bipartisan basis is going to have any hope of us surviving. I think we're faced with a competitor we don't understand, moving much faster and with much more forcefulness than we realize. And I think that the potential for them 10 years from now to be in a dominant position is vastly greater than anybody in our national security establishment thinks. So that's sort of my background. That's really what I wanted to share with you. I don't want to, I guess I do want to sound alarmist, because the more I've studied, the more alarmed I am. And the more I've watched the absolute failure of the American system, from a news media which is totally absorbed in partisan baloney, to a Congress which is so far at least, incapable of looking at the big picture, to a bureaucracy which just ignores the president's instructions and continues down paths of failure, to a private industry that is stuck with massive debt and inadequate leadership and a terrified defensive position of hoping to buy a few more years at the expense of Huawei and 5G dominating the world. All of these things I found much worse than I would have guessed back in January, and I am much more concerned. And I think it should be a major issue next year.
Thank you.
I'll be glad to take questions. I must confess that the feedback makes it very hard to understand, so you may have to speak slowly or something.
Mr. Speaker, I'm the only one with the microphone at the moment. Let me just say again, thank you if you can hear me. This is, again, a vastly larger topic than we're going to address in full today, but we like to think that with your help and that of those on the Committee on the Present Danger of China, we have begun to address the elements of the problem, as you have done so well in the new book. If I could just ask you one specific question, sir. There is an effort now underway in both the House and the Senate to move legislation that would block the Thrift Savings Plan Board, shorthand for its formal title, from going forward in putting the investment funds of retirement funds of, again, those in government now and those who have served in the past, into these Chinese companies, and we've spent some time talking about how problematic a number of them are. As a man who has presided over the legislative process and has considerable influence on the Hill even yet, could I just ask you to get a sense of how urgently you would recommend your former colleagues to turn to this issue of what is going to be done with, after all, their money, perhaps to our great detriment?
Well, I think this is an area where Roger Robinson has done amazing work. And I can just tell you, I think that both the House and Senate should pass the legislation this fall before going home. And I recommend that you consider developing a pro-American versus pro-Chinese vote score and take something like this that basically say, look, if you support eliminating the Chinese from access to our capital markets, and in particular this one step, now we're going to give you a pro-American score, and if you oppose it, we're going to give you a pro-Chinese score. And I think that kind of scorecard developed over the course of the next 8 or 10 months could begin to really frame a series of issues in a way that the average American could understand.
It's a great idea. We have done similar things at the committee, the Center for Security Policy over the years, but I think the Committee on the Present Danger could very usefully develop such a document, and we will do that. Mr. Speaker, thank you. We're at the end of our time with you, and I want to say how much I appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to getting you back here in person on an earlier occasion.
Well, I'll be back next week, and I can just tell all of you what you're doing is vital to the survival of America, and I'm honored to be allowed to be part of it.
Thank you, sir.